So this is going to be pretty rapid fire. What you guys are going to get, this is an overview of what I normally do in 2 days, and also is an overview of what I cover in 350 pages of my book, Think Outside the Box Office. But it's actually reformulated in a sense with a different way of thinking about the world that I've developed over the last several years. So I'm going to go fast, and they want to do questions at the end. Generally, I find it keeps it a little lively. If you guys have specific questions during, just raise your hand, shout it out, and I'll address it, or I'll say I'm going to cover it later. So I'm just going to start. So basically, my name is John Reese. I'm a filmmaker. I've been making films for about 30 years. Oops. And hang on, this is probably better down here. I've been making films for about 30 years. In my last film called Bomb It, B-O-M-B-I-T, it's about graffiti all over the world. We premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2007, thinking that we're going to sell the film and move on. I was going to move on to another film. It was the best film that I felt I had made. We filled up theaters, 5 theaters, turned away 200 people per screening. I thought, oh my God, we're going to make a sale. This is great. This is basically the way it's supposed to work. And basically nothing at the end of the festival. We got 3 offers for no money for all rights for 20 years. A week later, the film was available as a bootleg on Canal Street. And that's when I started realizing that the world had changed somewhat. And it's about the year that the bottom fell out of the market in general, and the bottom fell out of the independent film world market. And I basically created a strategy for the film, a hybrid strategy for the film myself. And my producer said I should start writing about it because he'd never seen someone do what I was doing. And I wrote a few articles for Filmmaker magazine, and then I seemed to have a knack for taking a complex system and explaining it in a matter-of-fact, kind of step-by-step way. And people said, oh, you should write a book about this. And people kind of asked me to explain things to them, and basically I said I took 4 months and wrote the book, Think Outside the Box Office. And since then, I've been kind of like writing about this process and teaching other filmmakers this process, et cetera, and that's what brings me here to you. So essentially, a new model of distribution has arisen. Previously, there was one way to reach an audience, and this, basically what I'm going to talk about, it applies to film, it applies to music, it applies to art, it applies to all the arts, essentially. And that's actually the subject of one of my next books, is applying this model to all of the arts, not just the film. It's essentially a new world of artistic distribution and artistic entrepreneurship that affects everyone. So before there were film studios, book publishers, record labels, etc., art galleries, etc., and that's how artists reached an audience, okay? So they were essentially one version of what is called an all rights deal. So for film, you sold your film to a distributor. They owned the rights to that film for 20 years, and in exchange for that, they gave you a chunk of change, a pot of money, because essentially, as everyone knows, you're not going to get any other money out of that distributor at any other time. Same thing for music labels. Record labels would make a deal with an artist for several albums. Same thing with art galleries. They would sign an artist for a certain number of years, and then they control the rights to that artist's work, and the artist produces work and they sell the work. Okay? So the pros of this is that some artists made a lot of money, and especially in the 80s, 90s, and aughts, there were a lot of filmmakers who made a lot of money, which created this mythology of this festival acquisition model, which a lot of people got rich, and now there's still this mythology within filmmakers that model still exists. That people rush out to make a film, think that they're going to sell it at a film festival, get rich, and make another film. And that still works, and we'll talk about this in a second, for very few people, but it doesn't work for the majority of people. All right? So the problem is, yes, it's only available for very few. Okay, there are estimates that anywhere between 35,000 to 50,000 feature films are made every year in the world that are trying to get distribution of some kind. Okay, it's a massive number when you think about that. 4,000 of those are submitted, for instance, to Sundance, okay, which is one of the premier sales festivals in the world. 200 get in, and of those, last year, 20 made a deal that made some kind of financial sense. And half of those deals were in the low 6 figures. Okay, so $100,000 to $200,000. So 10 films made deals at Sundance that made over 6 figures. So basically covered the cost of a decently sized film out of 50,000 films made every year. Okay, you multiply that by 3 markets, you end up with 30 films, maybe 40 films that are sold in the traditional way, the mythology, sold in the way that the mythology exists, that someone's going to come along, buy your film, take it off your hands, give you a chunk of change, and then go do all the work for you, and you don't have to do anything, and you can go on your other film. How many of the people in the room still think that that's how their films are going to get distributed? Good. God, usually it's everyone still thinks, and then I'm here crushing their dreams, you know, so good. Because several years ago, up until several years ago, and you still get people at every filmmaker at Sundance still thinks this is going to happen to them. And then most of them afterwards are left with a hangover going, oh my God, what do I do now? All right? So the problems with this is that, number one, it's a one-size-fits-all approach. So if your film can fit into a studio model of releasing or a traditional model of releasing, that's good. But I find that most films don't really fit that model, which is part of the reason that the bottom fell out of the independent film world, is because the studios were trying to release independent films or niche films or films that had particular interest in the way that they release mass films. And that didn't really work. Okay, number two, and one of the biggest problems is the loss of control and accountability. And I usually use the analogy of basically what it is, you're in the business of selling your children. Okay, so you make a child, your film, and you sell it to someone, a baby seller, and that baby seller takes your film, and you're trusting that the person who bought your baby is going to take care of the baby. Okay, and maybe that person is going to put it into the best schools, raise it well, treat it nicely, not beat it, you know, and send it off to college, etc. But maybe that person is going to take that baby, stick it on a shelf, not feed it, not play with it, and just let it atrophy, which happens to many, many films. Okay, so it's, to me, that child analogy, like when you make a film, you're creating a child, is very apt and applies all the way through the process, frankly. And then the other big problem is that you have no connection to your audience. Okay, so if you give your film away to someone else, if they, and generally they don't have a connection to your audience, any chance of you having a direct relationship with your audience and developing an audience and a direct relationship for the future of your career doesn't exist, because the person distributing your film has the potential for that relationship to an audience. Generally, they don't care about that, and they don't even bother with collecting that audience data, and even if they did, they won't give it to you. All right? So when you leave the world of the overall deal, you're in the world of split rights, okay, where you are in control of the release of your film, and that you take all the rights of your film and you assign them to different people or sell them to different entities. You partner with different distribution companies, in which, and in this case, you have more control over those deals. There's more accountability when you have these one-to-one relationships with these individual companies. And whatever rights you don't assign or sell to someone else, or decide not to sell to someone else because the deal doesn't work for you, you release yourself, or you basically hold on it until you can release it yourself. Okay? And that's the essential difference. You are in control of this process as opposed to someone else being in control of the process. And even if you partner with other companies, you partner with broadcasters, you partner with VOD companies, you partner with theatrical release companies, you are in control of the process instead of someone else being in control of the process. All right, so beyond split rights, I want to start talking, and I want people to start thinking about this notion of the artist entrepreneur, okay, which is in a sense where you create a long-term relationship with your fan base. All right, it's a sustainable model. It's a potentially sustainable model, let me put it that way. We're at the very early stages of this process as far as where this could work for filmmakers. It's already working for musicians. It came out of a concept a number of years ago from the music industry of 1,000 true fans. All right, so the concept was is if you had 1,000 true fans who would each give you $50 to make a record, and this is the beginning of the idea of crowdfunding, that you would then have $50,000 to make a record, so that you could rely on your fans to sustain you instead of record labels. Okay, and so the same model is applicable to film as everyone here is familiar with crowdfunding by now, yes? Is there anyone who isn't familiar with crowdfunding? That's great, because 3 years ago, 2 years ago, no one knew what crowdfunding was. Okay, so now crowdfunding is one tool where an audience can actually help you get your projects made. And it's only one of the tools that's available to filmmakers. It is currently the most effective tool for filmmakers, but it's still not the only one. And the key to this is to move from a project-to-project model to a career-centric model, so that no longer are you thinking of yourself as, okay, I'm going to make this film's done, I finished with that one, I don't really deal with that film anymore, and then I move on to another one. This project, this method, this idea is where you make a film, you develop an audience, you transition that audience into the next project, and frankly, where you potentially develop an audience even before you make your first film. You bring that audience into your first film, you relate to them during the process and release of that film, and you bring that audience into your next film, and over the course of your career, you grow that audience with you. And as the size and scope of your projects change, hopefully the size and scope of your audience also grows with you. Okay, so there's a couple of terms out there for this. I personally don't like the DIY term, which I'll get to an extent. I prefer these two terms, and there's a number of terms developing around this concept. One is coined by a guy named Mike Masnick from a blog called TechDirt, which if you're interested in the subject, I recommend that you RSS and follow. It's called CWF plus RTV, which means, I just lost my audio, which means connect with fans, give them a reason to buy, and you will make money. Okay, so connect with fans, give them a reason to buy, and you'll make money. I don't think you want to talk. So the other way of referring to this is direct to fan. And both of these terms, starting with the music industry again, and I use the music industry as an example because they've actually succeeded in this model. That the record industry collapsed before the film industry collapsed. Musicians had to adapt before filmmakers had to adapt, and they've been proceeding with this model before us and pioneering. So if you want to learn more about this, I actually recommend not just looking at what the film industry does and what filmmakers do, but also look at what other artists are doing, and especially musicians, because they've been doing this for a lot longer. Don't just look at film crowdfunding campaigns as an example. Look at, for instance, Amanda Palmer's campaign, musicians who have been doing this for a while. Amanda Palmer's crowdfunding video from her last crowdfunding campaign is absolutely brilliant. Okay, so one of the first, and I say top vote because that's think outside the box office, and us Americans love our acronyms. So the top vote core principle number one is that every film is different and needs its own unique distribution and marketing plan. Okay, so as opposed to the acquisition model, and as opposed to the overall deal where every film is kind of treated similarly, what you need to do is think about creating a unique plan for your own film. So in order to do this, you need to consider four things. The first thing is your goals, and every time I talk to a filmmaker, I always go back to what are the goals of the project. Like often filmmakers will come up to me and say, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to try this, I want to try that. The thing you have to go back to, the first thing I ask them is, what are your goals? Because different goals will result in a different plan for your film, okay? Because there are many different ways to release a film, and those different ways will achieve different goals. Okay, number two is your film, number three are your resources, and number four is who your audience is, okay? So we're going to look at this first. What are your goals? So what do you need and what do you want from your film release? I usually have a little whiteboard up here, and I usually ask, so what are some of the things that you guys want from your films, or the release of your films? What? Yes? Hello? You guys can shout out. Okay, not all at once. What? Like an audience. Okay, an audience. Okay. Credibility, I usually call that fame. Yeah? Okay. Money, fortune. Oh my God, this is a documentary audience, and the thing that normally comes first in a documentary audience is last. Oh, what else do documentary filmmakers want from their films?
Change the world.
Change the world. God, man. At Hot Docs, they got that first. At Sheffield, I don't know about this. Okay, change the world. Yes, so, and basically the old school approach did all of this. I usually use Earl Morse's Thin Blue Line as an example, which was like Grand Slam. I sometimes use baseball analogies because I'm one of those Americans who actually likes one of the most boring sports on earth called baseball. You guys have cricket, so that's even more boring than baseball. So, career launch, which is fame, right? Which is that credibility thing to make another film in the traditional way. Second is money. Everyone likes to try to pay back their investors or earn something from their films. It's a nice thing that you actually work your ass off. You probably work harder than anyone else in the world, and sometimes you'd like to be paid for it and not be poor all the time. And I know I'm talking to documentary filmmakers, and you're used to being for all the time, but sometimes it's nice to move beyond being for all the time. Number 3 is audience, because usually people make films to communicate a message to someone else or to communicate with large numbers of people. And then 4 is to change the world. Okay, so Thin Blue Line, it made a ton of money. It launched Errol Morris's career. It changed the world. It affected death penalty legislation throughout the United States. Got the guy off death row. You can't really do better than that. And it was seen by millions and millions of people all across the United States. So that's great. Okay. So, but what I want you to start thinking about is this 5th model, or this 5th goal, which is a long-term relationship with your audience and your fan base. And so, which can feed to other things, okay? But this is something that I think, especially when people are early in their career, or when you're even at the midpoint of your career, even at the height of your career, and you're realizing that the traditional sources of funding are dwindling, and are dwindling more and more every year as broadcast revenue comes down, co-production revenue comes down, government support comes down, because money is tight all over, that somehow, potentially, a better way of raising money is potentially through your audience. People who like your work and who will support your work. And that's actually been 3 years ago when I was saying this. It was a little bit, you can make maybe $10,000 this way. But people on a regular basis are now raising $100,000 plus from crowdfunding. Now, those are not people who are at the beginning of their career. Those are people who have built a robust fan base and are connecting with their fans over a long-term basis. But it shows the potential for all filmmakers that there is success to be had in this model. Okay, number 2, evaluate your film. The thing that I think is the most important thing is to make your film as good as possible. I know this is a no-brainer, but I can't tell you how many filmmakers whose films I watch, and the first thing I ask them, have you ever shown this to anyone besides your friends and family? And I would say 80% of them say no, okay? You have to, if you're making a film for an audience, you have to do test screenings. And test screenings have a little bit of a stigma because the studios do them. But you as filmmakers can own that process as well, because you're just getting wider and wider feedback. If you're making a film for an audience and you're trying to develop a relationship for an audience, then why not screen your film in front of an audience? And I was just talking to an executive yesterday, and it was kind of like that somehow it's like films are generally too long. Okay, that generally my feeling, I tweeted this a little while ago, that 90% of the films I see are about 30 minutes too long, 15 minutes, 30 minutes too long, 15 minutes too long, or 20 minutes too long, and 15 minutes of that can come out of the first 30 minutes. Okay, just so test your film, try to make, it's a hyper competitive marketplace. Remember, 50,000 films made every year. I think it's about 7 hours of footage gets uploaded to YouTube every minute or second. I mean, it's massive quantities of media that are out there vying for people's attention. You're only 1.5 hours of millions of hours of content out there. You have to be as good as possible, better than you could ever possibly be in the past when there were much fewer films made and much less media made. Okay, I'll stop harping on this. But the other thing I want to talk about this is how do you brand and position your film? Like, you need to think about where does your film sit in the marketplace and where does your film sit within the subject matter of your film, and how do you position it? For instance, Vomit, the film that I made about graffiti all over the world, there were plenty of graffiti documentaries made before that. But our position was that we were the global graffiti documentary. We were the first film that went to 5 continents, now 6 continents, and explored the history and the style and the kind of underlying ideas behind graffiti and street art all across the world. And that's how we positioned our film. That's how we created a difference between our film and other films. Okay, so you have to think about that, and you have to start thinking a little bit, and I know a lot of filmmakers are resistant to this, but you have to think about it a little bit like a marketer. You know, you have to think about it, not necessarily, you know, you don't necessarily, I should say this, because some people, it's a little bit of a divide, and some people, I think you should think about this to an extent at the inception stage, okay? But I don't want to say that you always have to think about market at inception. But at some point, you have to start thinking about who the audience and what the position of the film is. And if there have recently been 6 films about the subject that you're dying to make a film about, maybe there's another film and subject that you're also dying to make a film about, and maybe that's better to do first, okay? Because the marketplace is already crowded with that film, okay? All right, so consideration number 3, your resources in the new 50-50, okay? So the new 50-50 essentially is that 50% of your time and money should be spent making your film, and 50% of your time and money and energy should be taking that film and connecting it to an audience. Okay, so this is the big bad news and hard news for most filmmakers. Because most filmmakers will say, I'm a filmmaker, I don't do all this distribution stuff, I don't know how to do this, I'm not a businessman. I definitely understand that. Being a filmmaker, I understand this better than anyone. Okay, but this is the reality these days. So there aren't these distributors out there who are going to take your film and connect it to an audience. And maybe that's not also the best way to release your film in the first place. That then someone needs to do that. And that someone is generally you. This divide of this 50-50 always existed, except for that there used to be other people to take on that other 50% of the work. Generally, those people don't exist for most films anymore. So you, not necessarily as a filmmaker, but as a filmmaking team, have to realize that this is now your responsibility. Another way of looking at it, I look at the filmmaking process as this two-step process. It's no longer a one-step process of making the film and finishing the film, and then moving on. It's now, the first step is making the film and finishing the film, and the next step is connecting that film to an audience. Okay? And I don't really like to say that as steps, because it kind of implies that you do one thing first and then connect it to an audience second. To me, I think it's really important to integrate the two so that they overlap as much as possible. That you're actually starting the audience integration, you're connecting to an audience actually from inception, and that the two steps go, it's basically left leg, right leg. So left leg is making the film, right leg is connecting that film to an audience. Okay? So, obviously there's cost of time. Essentially, if you're going to do a full release of your film, it's basically going to take a year of time. Okay? That's like you have a film that you really want to get out into the marketplace and do a full release of your film. It's at least a year of your time. Okay, is Matt still here? Matt took off for a little bit. I was just going to ask Matt how long he spent releasing his film, and I think it was actually more like 2 or 3 years. Okay, I've been working on Vomit. I use Vomit as a laboratory, so I'm a little crazy. I'm still working on Vomit, although not full time, 5 years later. Okay, it's now about, I would say, 10% of my time, but I still do work on Vomit. And basically, you'll find that all of your projects, you will continue to do some work on, because essentially, you want to keep those children alive and keep a relationship with your children throughout their career. You know, you don't want to just say bye. And, generally, like I'm married, my 16-year-old's about to go to college. I'm, going through the trauma of that. And it's like, I want to make sure I keep a relationship with him, just like I keep a relationship with my Vomit audience. And the thing I regret the most, actually, is that the films that I made around 2000, I made 2 feature films, I kind of never connected with an audience, and I didn't keep that audience connection up. And at some point, I have to restart that. But in a sense, it's like I didn't keep it going. Like I basically gave the films to orphanages, and it's now to reclaim the child from the orphanage and to reconnect with that child is a lot more work than if you keep connected with that child all the way through. Okay, so it's much better to keep a relationship with your films over time than to just kind of abandon them. Okay, moving on. Money, obviously, P&A, distribution costs money. I find it's very difficult to release a film, at least in the United States, for anywhere less than $30,000. All the costs generally add up. In my book, there's a whole chapter on budgeting, and there's 4 or 5 sample budgets. Just to give you an idea, when I was going to release Vomit theatrically in the United States, I budgeted at $30,000. My investor said, no, you can have $13,000. I said, fine, I'll do it for $13,000 because as filmmakers, you take whatever you can get. It ended up costing $60,000, but we basically took the money out of the release to pay for the rest of the release, right? So, because I'm not an idiot, I knew it was going to cost more than $13,000, but I figured just like any other filmmaker, especially documentary filmmakers, make it work however you can. Okay, so there's the solutions to the time. I'm not going to get into the money solutions too much. There you are, Matt. All right, so how much time did you spend? I just asked a question of you, and then you weren't there. So how long did you spend releasing your film? How much time did you spend releasing your film?
I guess from first festival showing, which was world premiere at London in 2009, to theatrical release in the UK, which was May 2010. Then we missed our slots in the States, we had to wait till April 2011. So, and I would say that from the end of the film proper, a year and a couple of months.
Yeah, okay. So, and that's actually fast considering everything that you guys did.
It could have been longer than that.
Yeah.
There were other factors that we had to
distributing your film on your own. The whole notion of DIY, like everyone calls me the DIY guy, and I like it and I don't like it. Like, because to me, DIY is a philosophy, it's an attitude. Let me see if there's no slide on that coming up, so I'll just say it. It's an attitude. It's like basically, if no one else is going to do it, fuck it, I'm going to do it myself. Okay, I'm the DIY guy in that sense. Okay, but the whole notion of doing it yourself, everything by yourself, it's like you're going to want to commit suicide. Believe me. That's why the first article I wrote about this was how I spent 6 months wanting to kill myself every day. It's like really a tough road to do this on your own. So, and you generally don't, unless you're one of those filmmakers that likes to make handcrafted films by yourself, and you are the DP, the sound person, the producer, the editor, etc. You shouldn't even be considering releasing your film on your own. All right. So this is where I came up with the concept of the PMD, or the producer of marketing and distribution. So just like you have a producer making the film, you have a producer line producing your film, etc. So you have a producer helping you make the film. You need someone who's also going to do the distribution and marketing. Now that this is your responsibility, or now that this is filmmakers' responsibility, you need a crew to do this. So let me just run down the tasks of what a PMP does, and I think you'll realize very quickly why you want someone else to do this. So number one is to write a distribution and marketing plan for the film and budget for that plan, because every film is different, needs its own plan. In order to actually have an effective strategy, you need to actually create a strategy in advance. That plan will change over time, but you need to start somewhere. Find and suggest ways to raise money for the film through the audience, which is essentially crowdfunding. That's something that the PMP is also responsible for, because a lot of what crowdfunding is audience engagement and audience development, and that is the purview of the PMP. As you can see from number 4, which is identify and engage audiences through research, social media, your website, blogs, press, organizational outreach, crowdfunding, any other trick or technique in the book that you can possibly think of. Okay? 5, create promotional cross-media elements, so press kit, extra assets. The one thing I'll just say is an aside here. I would recommend that everyone in this room generally do not just make a feature film anymore. Think of the feature film as the center of a project, but understand that you need many, many other assets in order to promote that film. You need lots of extra content, different kinds of things that you can release on the web, exchange, do exchanges with your audience that they'll refer and do things for you. Have other kinds of content which can sometimes be the foundation of a cross-media campaign, but you don't have to think of it as complicated as a cross-media campaign. Just think of it as starting to create extra content so that you're not one of the filmmakers who comes to me and I ask, what other assets do you have in order to release the film, and all they have is a trailer. And they don't have anything else. And it's very hard to release a film if you can't seed other things to an audience in advance. Okay? Yep. Well, documentary filmmakers, it's easy because you guys all have extra content. Bombit, we shot 500 hours of footage for a 90-minute film. We had 200 artists that we filmed. We had tons of extra artists, so we cut little pieces of these artists and made webisodes out of them. And some of them were, we got 40, 50, 60,000 hits on some of those episodes because, the guys were pretty great and they just didn't end up in the film, for instance. But you can think more strategically. The Cosmonaut project out of Spain is the best example, easiest example that I give, is that, and this is for a narrative film, that in the 10 weeks before that film is going to get released, they're going to do a 10-week web series of the pre-story before the film starts. Okay, so that's a very simple cross-media example of that. Yeah.
That piece that you asked me for about our London Film Festival.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing that I think that I'm most surprised to see filmmakers not doing is filming their world premiere and then box popping the audience afterwards.
Yeah.
The point about the process is that most people won't be able to come to your theatrical screening. What you need to prove is that not only is the film cinema worthy, but the people came out of it and said it was amazing.
Right.
You need to capture that on camera and then create a 2-minute clip which you then play.
Okay, so let me, just because they want to get all this on, they want to get this all on the mic, so let me just repeat what you just said, is that, Matt, is that still live on your website? So if you go to Bill Hicks AmericanTheMovie.com, you'll see their world premiere video. It's the best example I've seen from an independent of a world premiere captured with audience reaction. I actually show it to all my other all my clients to say, this is what you should be creating. And if you want to see other examples, we actually, for the Joffrey film, which I released this year, on our website, we did 5 of those. For each of them, we did 1 for Chicago, one for LA, which hasn't been released yet, another one for New York that we just released now. So you film all your events and then cut little clips. Now, what I'm also saying is that that's what you do after you finish the film when you're in release, so that you constantly are creating assets, but you need to think in advance of creating assets during production, okay, so that you have that stuff even before you release your film. Okay, so moving on, assemble a marketing distribution team, because just as that person shouldn't be, just as you shouldn't be doing this on their own, it's too much work for a PMD to do on their own. So for instance, I was essentially the PMD on the film about the Joffrey Ballet that I released this year. But I actually didn't even do the social media myself. Sherry Candler, who's my partner on the project, she did the marketing social media. We hired a publicist, Lynn Casey. I hired bookers, which is Crowdstarter with bookers. I had an assistant throughout. So we had a very robust, basically a film production team doing the distribution. Essentially what you're doing is you're recreating a model of a distributor, in a sense. And distributors have a huge team of people, right? So what you need to do is create a team of people. It doesn't mean that you're going to have them on staff all the time, you know, and it's going to change over the life cycle of the film. But especially as you get into release, you're going to need more and more people to help you with the release. Okay. Okay. Engage. Yep.
You had affinity publicists versus home publicists?
Oh yeah. So affinity publicists. So for instance, in the Joffrey Ballet, we only brought on a film publicist for our New York theatrical. The rest of the time, I use someone who I've used for all my culture films before, and that's mostly what I do, which is someone who's an arts and culture publicist. So they know all the arts and culture reviewers who are going to be much more favorable to my films than necessarily film reviewers. And then when you absolutely need film press, like for a New York theatrical, then you bring on a film publicist to do some supplemental work and handle 10 of the top film reviewers in New York. And I find that much more effective for most films that are niche-oriented or have a specific field, which actually applies to probably most everyone in the film, in the room, and documentary filmmakers. I actually recommend a niche publicist over a film publicist for your projects. In general, but I won't say this for every film. Generally, it's good to have someone on board who's doing this. And I actually find that the PMD concept, the other country that's adopting the PMD concept, it's being adopted in the States, is England. So the Scottish Documentary Institute has a PMD on staff now to work with their films, and Dogwoof is starting to do PMD tasks on certain of their films as well. So they're actually starting to call themselves PMDs. And I also know, James, do you consider yourself a distributor, or do you consider yourself a PMD, or both?
Both.
What?
Both.
Both. And then Sally Hodgson, who also works in the UK as a PMD. There's actually probably as many or more PMDs in the UK than there are in the United States, actually, at this point in time. Okay, so start this process at inception. CWF, connecting with audience, takes a long time. If you started just when you're starting a release, you're in for a world of hurt, okay? It takes a while to connect with people. And especially, I recommend that you connect with organizations. If you have a topic, especially for documentary filmmakers, there's usually some organization that's aligned with your area of interest. It takes a while to connect with them, and if you've already finished your film and you go, hey, I want to connect with you because I want you to help me release my film, they're going to go, well, yeah, okay, good. So you just want to use us, and why would we be involved in it? So you always want to present it as win-win, and it's always easier to present it as win-win if you start earlier so they can get involved earlier in the process. Number 4 is to engage your audiences from inception. Okay, so I basically boiled down audience engagement into a 4-step process. It used to be a 3-step process, but I've added step number 3, which I feel is very important. Okay, number 1, who is your audience? Identification is super important, and it's not 18 to 25-year-old boys. You know, that is too broad, and I'll explain that in a second. Number 2, where do those people receive information? Okay, so who's the audience? How do they learn about films? Who recommends films to them? Number 3, what value do you provide to your audience? This is the new one. You have to provide value to your audience, and having a good film is not enough, okay? If your film is totally amazing and it's winning awards at every single film festival, okay, then that's probably enough, okay? But that's like 10 films a year, 20 films a year, something like that, out of 50,000. For all the other films, you have to think of other kinds of value that you can provide your audience, okay, to engage them in your film. Number 4, what kind of products does your audience buy? Does your audience buy, how does your audience consume media? All right, so I made a film about graffiti artists. Okay, graffiti artists are used to not paying for things, I'll put this simply. So I didn't really realize when I was making the film, I was like, oh, all these guys are going to support my film and they're going to buy DVDs and blah, blah, blah. They're not going to buy DVDs, they're going to rip DVDs, they're going to watch it off the internet. So I have to think smartly about had I known what I know now, and frankly, had systems existed, then that I know now, it might have been smart to release my film on Vodo at the time, which releases a film straight to the pirate community and can monetize off the pirate community. So you have to think about how your audience engages with media so that you can provide your product in a way that they're used to seeing it and desiring to see it. Yeah? Well, it provided a way for graffiti artists and people who are interested in street art to see how their work has been affected, how it changed in different all over the world, and to see other artists, etc. But the other kind of value I created is I ended up cutting 40 extra webisodes out of the material that wasn't in the film and put those out on the web to engage people. And a lot of those got more views than Vomit did. But then by providing those webisodes, it then led people to Vomit, actually. And actually, providing those webisodes led me to Arte. That actually, by having those webisodes for free on the net, someone from Arte saw them and said, oh, we want your film. So who's your audience? As I said, it's not 18 to 25-year-old boy men. It's not 35 to 55-year-old women. It's not any large and specific demographic. How's my time? 11:08. Oh, okay, good. We're doing well. These large demographics are too expensive to market to. So I'm going to use an example of my version of the long tail. How many people are familiar with Chris Anderson's concept of the long tail? 2, 3, 4. Wow, that's usually there's maybe one, so that's pretty good. So on the y-axis you have audience size, and then on the x-axis you have audiences. Okay. So in this realm of the large mass audience over there, that's essentially the studio realm. Okay. So this is where. This is why. Hang on a second. All right, so this is your 18 to 25-year-old boy men. This is your 35 to 55-year-old women. They're all over here. It costs around $100 million to market to those large audiences. Okay, and that's what the studios are doing. Okay, that's what Coca-Cola's doing. That's what Nike's doing. Okay, there's a lot of advertising. There's a lot of money being thrown to get that mass audience to pay attention to these large brands, right? And I'm using studios as a brand as well. You're not going to be able to compete with that. It's going to be very difficult to compete with that, all right? So what you're in the realm of this is the long tail. And maybe my clicker's too far away. Okay? So what you're marketing to, just hang on, sorry. There we go. What you want to identify are niches, okay? What a niche is a group of people organized around a specific topic or share a particular interest, okay? The reason being is because niches are accessible and you can afford to market to them. So as an example, in this long tail, each of these verticals is a niche, all right? So, and so, for example, for my film, here are graffiti writers, and here are people who love graffiti. So graffiti writers are frankly all the way down here. There aren't that many people who really are crazy enough to go out at night, paint graffiti, have the skills to do it, and don't mind getting arrested or chased by police, or actually enjoy being chased by the police. It's a very small community of people. So for instance, for the Bill Hicks documentary, I'll just say, so fans of Bill Hicks, like the people who know Bill Hicks here, are right here. The fans of political comedy are probably, it's probably getting to be a pretty big audience, which is why he was able to probably start here, which then branched out and led over here. Is that generally a decent way of putting it, in a sense? And one of the things that they did smartly was that they realized that some of these fans of Bill Hicks were comedians who had their own audiences. So the fans, like, who were some of the big comedians that you had that, like, had audiences that, became involved in the film and the release of the film?
Just like Keith Oldman.
Okay. Just one. Okay.
Twitter, actually. I mean, you don't need a personal connection to reach out to
So for instance, fans of Bill Hicks are over here, for instance, in the United States. In the UK it's probably higher. In the States it's a small group. But then fans of Keith Olbermann are here, right? So if you can connect with these fans of Keith Olbermann, who are then also fans of Bill Hicks, then that's already a bigger audience that you can then reach out to. Okay? So what you're looking for are these core supporters. So for instance, in the Bill Hicks film, the core supporters are the fans of Bill Hicks, who then will then promote to the rest of their networks. And then you get to the secondary and tertiary audiences, which are larger audiences that surround those core audiences. So for example, the writers and artists in the film, the Bauman is one, or in the case of Bill Hicks, it would be the fans of Bill Hicks. Number two would be the crowds and networks of the writers and artists in the film, which is larger because they communicate to their audience. And then number three, we're going out to all the hardcore writers that exist in the world. And then the fans of the hardcore writers, and then all graffiti and street artists. And then you get out to friends of all the graffiti and street artists. And I would say that for Bauman, we're about somewhere around here now. And I intend, because we're releasing Bauman 2 this year, I eventually want to get the project, I'm trying to get the project further and further out here. And I know that it works. Like I do have someone who keeps the social media of our concept alive. I basically have a PMD on Bauman. And now we're up to 12,000 likes. And I can see the effect because our Netflix licenses keep on going up. So that as I do work, I get more and more money from Netflix. I renewed my deal with New Video, that this stuff still pays off and I get more money as the project goes on, so that basically, the investor of the project sees that he essentially has an income stream from the project that goes year and year and year. Okay, so what you're striving for is the fat part of the long tail. And basically, any of the success stories, the real breakout indie success stories, end up being about here, in this fat part of the long tail, which is actually a term, the fat part of the long tail, if you can actually believe it. Okay, so number two, where does your audience reside? Essentially boils down to how does your audience receive information? What media do they consume? Is it social, traditional media? Where are they geographically based? Are they in certain physical communities, etc.? So I used to like to use an example here of a film called Charlotte, which my producer actually made, which is about the making of one wood boat. Shot in 16 millimeters, a documentary, and follows, it's almost experimental. But it just follows the making of one wood boat. Okay, so who's the audience of that film? Anyone want to guess? Carpenters is one, but essentially what's the super core? People who love and utilize wood boats, not fiberglass, wood, okay? So where do those people receive information? They are not online. There is one magazine called Wood Boat Magazine, and they all read that. So where does that? They all receive information from Wood Boat Magazine. Okay, so he made a relationship with the editor of Wood Boat Magazine, and that's how he connected directly to the core audience of that film. And then again, geographically, where does it make sense for him to release that film? Near water where people have wood boats. So it ends up being a lot of wealthy communities. Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, Chesapeake Bay, Puget Sound, south of France, the Caribbean, etc. So he targeted film festivals and screenings in each of those areas. Okay? Because that's where his core audience of people who love wood boats congregate and are accessible, and film festivals will go, oh, we have an audience here. So for instance, for the Joffrey film, obviously, number one, where we premiered the Joffrey film was the Dance on Camera Film Festival, which is out of Lincoln Center, which is connected to our audience. And one of the other film festivals that picked this up was Sarasota, which is a nice festival, and it's because Florida, there's a big ballet audience in Florida, and they actually did a partnership with the local ballet company to screen the film there. Okay, so you think about where, and when we targeted that film, when we actually went out initially, what cities were we going to target for that film was where there were ballet companies that were already associated with Joffrey Ballet, former members of the Joffrey Ballet. And those are the cities that we targeted first in order to do screenings. In addition, where does the current Joffrey Ballet tour? And we actually hit and have screened probably in 70% of those specific cities. Okay. What? It's called Joffrey Mavericks of American Dance. About the boat, Charlotte. And that's the name of the boat. And And I tried to get him to change the name of the film, but he wouldn't change the name of it. I think it's Charlotte, the Wood Boat Story is now the subtitle. And he actually, this is a guy who hates social media, but he blogs about once a month and, you know, writes about the process of the film and about, et cetera. It's pretty, just hates social media. Okay, so channels of connection are influencers. That's one thing to think about. Who are the influencers within that niche? And that's very good. So, for instance, in the Bill Hicks story, the influencers are the comedians who love Bill Hicks. And those are people who have, like Keith Oberman, as he said, has a huge Twitter following. And if you can connect with that person and they can talk about the film, your film, that's really valuable. Social media, websites, blogs, traditional media, organizational partnerships for documentaries are huge. I would actually put organizational partnerships under influencers. Because social media on a one-to-one basis takes a long time. Organizations are already connected to audience and they can help jumpstart your social media campaign by helping you connect to their audiences. Okay, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, sponsorships, which are basically corporate partnerships, and cross-media transmedia. I know if there's any hardcore cross-media people in here, I don't mean to just say that cross-media is a marketing campaign. It's mostly used by the studios as a marketing campaign. And I know a lot of cross-media people are pissed about that association. But it is true that cross-media, by its very nature, connects with audience and helps develop an audience. And thereby, it's hard to separate from marketing. Yeah? Right.
It's just important to make sure that you understand that partnerships can be made if you're connecting with the right people, that they do want you to be in touch because you're giving them free stuff.
Right. Well, what I want to point out to that, Master says that partnerships want to connect with you because you're giving them something of value. And yes, for many films, just having a film about the subject is enough. And some organizations have been dying to have a film about the subject. Okay? But for many organizations, there's already tons of films about the subject matter. Or they have plenty of films to choose from, like environmental films or films about global warming. What you have to figure out is what's in it for them. You have to constantly think about, like, what's in it for the organization? What's in it for the audience? What value do you provide? And you have to think about creating win-win relationships with everyone else around you, with organizations and also with your audience. And so you're providing value. You didn't just say, oh, promote my film for me. You said, okay, if you do this, I will give you this. You know, there was an exchange. I'm providing you value. You can provide me value. And another example of that is that's why you create T-shirts and have DVDs in advance so that radio stations will promote for you because then they say they have a giveaway. You give to their audience, and then while they're talking about the giveaway, they're talking about your film. Okay, so crowdsourcing is basically I just want to talk about two of those things that I just listed out. Crowdsourcing is the application of open source concepts of software development to other areas outside of software development. Okay, so for instance, Star Trek is an early example of this. This is a filmmaker, he moved from Finland, whose second film is Iron Sky, where Star Trek was essentially made by people contributing shots from all over the world. That's an extreme version of crowdsourcing, for example. If you're interested in this concept, actually, Tiffany Shlain is in the process of doing a crowdsourced film. And as she's in the process of it, it's good. She is talking about her process. She's tweeting about her process, blogging, and emailing about her process. So if you're interested in this concept, she is being very open about it. She's actively doing it right now. She's a documentary filmmaker from the United States who made the film Connected, which was out last year. Okay. Tiffany Shlain, S-H-L-A-I-N. She's on Twitter, Tiffany Shlain, at Tiffany Shlain. And she's, if you want an example of someone who uses social media really well as a filmmaker, she's a good person to follow. Okay. So, and the advantage of this, what happens, and it's the same thing in crowdfunding, is that the audience who contributes to the project is then invested in the project. Okay, so that they're no longer just a viewer. It's not just a viewer-maker relationship. It's a participant relationship, okay? And by them participating in the film, they are invested in the film, okay? And want to see the process of that film and want to help you spread the word of the film. They will become proselytizers for you because they're invested. So obviously, you know, when people talk about crowdfunding or generating email lists or starting their social media, you obviously start with your friends and family. What crowdsourcing is a way of doing is extending your friends and family. You know, extending where the film, I should say, starting with the crew, and what crowdsourcing does is extend the crew to a much broader audience. Okay, so another example of this is a film called Ride the Divide, which I wrote about in the second book that I co-wrote. It's a book that I co-wrote with Sherry Candler and the Film Collaborative, and it's a film about a bike race from the Canadian border to the Mexican border down the Continental Divide. And what they did is they used a company called Sonic Bids, which is basically a crowdsourcing music company, online company. And what they do is they have bands from all over the United States, and probably the world now, I think, that say, oh, we want to do gigs, we want to do music for films, etc. And what they did is they targeted bands along the Continental Divide where they knew that they were going to be doing screenings, and they targeted bands that would come out and perform for their film as an event, and then incorporated their music into the soundtrack. So they got their bands to be invested in the film and to partner with them, bands that made sense for the audience of the film. The audience of the film, remember, geographically, one of the target audiences, because the film takes place along the Continental Divide. That's where they initially started doing their screenings, and a lot of their screenings took place along the Continental Divide. Okay. So crowdfunding, you guys are familiar with that. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. This is one of the big examples of crowdfunding. It is a game, which actually has a way of becoming more popular and more, you know, it has a bigger audience than many films. But $3.3 million is a decent chunk of change to raise through your crowd. Okay, so what value do you provide to your audience? Is there an experience that you can own? How do you build equity and community around your brand? What will cause your audience to buy, refer, return, and support for you? So this is essentially, what else are you doing besides creating a feature film? Again, sometimes a feature film is enough, but often a feature film is not enough. And especially if you want to engage your audience with media beforehand, you have to think of what kind of content that you can create for that audience. And so here's a list of what you can provide for your audience. Okay, so content media part one is obviously a great film, book, song, whatever you are actually creating. Number two, information. Okay, so you can blog about the subject of your film. You can tweet about the subject of your film. You can do updates. So notice that I say about the subject of your film. What you don't want to be doing is tweeting and blogging constantly about your film. That's really boring. No one wants to hear the world of me all the time. Okay, it's like if you've noticed on the internet, I regularly unsubscribe from people who are only talking about themselves. I don't care about that. I want to hear from people who are not just talking about themselves, but talking about the world that I'm interested in. Okay, so if you talk about the world that you're interested in, people will come. So for instance, Vomit, very early on in the process of making Vomit, my producer, Tracy Wares, was blogging weekly, not about our film, but about graffiti activity all over the world. You know, so our brand was the Global Graffiti Documentary, so we weren't just talking about graffiti in Los Angeles or the United States. We would find interesting topics about graffiti all over the world and write about them. Okay? Number three, a connection. You can provide some sort of sense of community. This is something Tiffany Schlane, again, does very, very well. Number four is an experience, either online or offline. You know, if there's some sort of experience that you can provide to your audience, it doesn't have to necessarily be an interactive experience, although it can be an interactive experience. This is what I'm saying, some other form of media that you can create that provides an experience. Or, for instance, as we're going to talk about, if you can create an event for your audience. Number five is content part two, which is other assets, which is part of, you know, this other cross-media's content, which I've already referred to. Okay. All right, so I want to move out of audience development and talk about redefinition of film rights, which I feel is important for filmmakers, especially independent filmmakers, because I feel that film rights generally, and this is a list, kind of a general list of film rights that are kind of out there. This list comes from a studio perspective, which is reactive to technology. So there used to be one way to see a film, which was in a theater, right? And And then television developed, so the studios developed television divisions. Then home video developed, and studios developed home video divisions, and on and on and on. And this works for the studios, and it's a way that they monetize films. But I don't feel like it works for independents, because you as an independent don't have multiple divisions with multiple people working in each of these areas. So you have to figure out a way to take all these rights and kind of like rethink them in a way that's going to make sense strategically for you. So I've basically done that and created four categories. So what the reclassification allows you to do is to organize your releases in a way that makes sense for your particular film. And it's an ability to focus on developing your audience and engages them and experience media in a way that works for your audience. Okay? And it's not going to be the same for every film. And essentially, if you have 4 different ways, which is what my reclassification is, instead of 10 different ways of thinking about it, it allows you to take multiple rights and put them into one category so that you can think about releasing them in the same way. So I know this is very general. I want to get to a specific as soon as possible. So the ways I'm going to talk about this are, first of all, digital, secondly, events, third, merchandise, and fourth is immersive. And so those are essentially the categories of film rights that I think that filmmakers should be thinking about. I'm not going to talk too much about immersive and interactive because I'm going to run out of time. And there's also a presentation about transmedia, I think, tomorrow, which is going to go into much more depth than I can go to in this overview. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is redefining digital rights. Digital rights are basically any way that you can see a film in the form of, or experience content in the form of zeros and ones. Okay, so essentially, how can zeros and ones be delivered? Zeros and ones can be delivered through how? Cable devices, or not cable devices, but wires or over the air. So those are basically, over the air is actually terrestrial television or internet and Wi-Fi, right? Those are 2 over the air methods of delivering zeros and ones. How can zeros and ones be delivered through wires? They can be delivered either through Ethernet wires or through cable wires. Okay, you see what I'm saying? That there basically is less and less difference. Are there any broadcasters in the room? Okay, so for broadcasters, this concept has become increasingly apparent, and that's why broadcasters are very omnivorous about the rights that they want, and increasingly so because they see digital rights as competition, especially streaming. In a sense, they're right in one way that there is not a huge difference between streaming and television, because what you're doing is providing content for free over some sort of digital content for free over some kind of network. Transactional and subscription is different, but actually the reason that HBO won't allow you to have separated SVOD rights, which are subscription VOD rights, such as Netflix, is because they have their own subscription VOD channel, which is their HBO Go channel, which is in direct conflict with Netflix, which is why HBO doesn't have any of their shows on Netflix, because they see them as direct competition. Okay, so there are 2 certainties. Digital rights are invading television and vice versa, and companies will ask for as many rights as possible, and you essentially have to push back against that. You'll see contracts where the company will want more and more rights, and you have to say, no, we can give you this non-exclusively for a certain window, but we want to reserve SVOD and TVOD, and it depends on the size of the deal, et cetera. Essentially, everything is negotiable. And essentially, you need someone on board your team who can negotiate this process for you. Okay. Because these rights are formally 2 disparate rights, they're a minefield, and that's why you need what I usually call the bomb squad, someone to negotiate these rights for you. Okay? And you also need a map, which is some sort of layout of how your digital rights are allocated across the world. So that when you come across a certain deal, like a TV deal, 3 years later, and they want certain digital rights, you can look at your map and go, oh no, I have these and these rights for this person, these and these rights. So for instance, for Vomit, we were about to sell Vomit to Sky TV, but they wanted to see what other kinds of transactional SVOD, et cetera, and I had to go back and see, and I actually discovered, oh, Cinetic actually has sold transactional to Xbox in the UK. I had no idea that they had even done that. So I had to add that to my map in addition to what Dogwoof was doing, in addition to iTunes, etc. And I had to actually ask my digital aggregator in the States who was doing iTunes in the UK if they would turn off iTunes for 3 months during an exclusive window that Sky wanted, and they actually said, sure, we can turn it off. You see what I'm saying? So if you have some relationship with your digital aggregator, you know, they're pretty understanding. They'll see that a broadcast will increase awareness for your film, which will then help the digital rights. So in general, it's in their motivation, in their interest, to actually turn off those rights for a certain period of time and then turn them on. Okay. So 2 rules of digital rights: try not to give away rights, or really try to insist not giving away rights to entities that cannot monetize those rights. So for instance, if a company doesn't have an outlet for transactional VOD, don't give them the transactional rights. Okay? There's no reason to, because they can't do anything with those rights. And number 2, don't give exclusivity of those rights unless someone is giving you a chunk of change in exchange for that exclusivity. Okay? Okay. I'm actually going to skip this part because we're running out of time, but essentially, digital rights would be, you know, in summary, that basically digital rights are handled through television and VOD, which are generally trades of television networks, and then conventional digital rights, which are the domain of aggregators. Okay? The one thing I do want to say overall about digital rights is that digital rights are about the world of abundance. Okay? So you're providing content to a large group of people in a very accessible way. Okay? And what you need to think about, and usually the amount paid for those rights are less and less, especially for digital rights. Conventional digital rights, the amount of money that you can get from iTunes, Netflix, etc., is small compared to what people are used to getting from broadcasters. Okay? So as things become more abundant, the price for those things comes down, unfortunately. So what you have to think about for film in order to monetize is understanding that there's this world of abundance, not only over the course of taking your film and putting it out abundantly to people, but understanding that there's a world of abundance of lots of content, and how do you create scarcity? Okay, so let me just briefly go over the types of digital rights. Okay, so there's cable VOD for VOD, and the types of internet VOD, which is iVOD, are first of all AVOD, which is ad-supported VOD, which is generally Hulu, some form of YouTube if you're a YouTube partner, where the ads actually are what pays for the content being online. SVOD, which is subscription, so the most common versions of that are Netflix or Amazon Prime. Okay? And number 3 is transactional VOD, which is iTunes, some sort of download to own, or Distrify, where people pay to stream content. Anything where there's someone's paying for viewing content is transactional VOD, TVOD. Okay? Yeah. What? No, Hulu is AVOD because it's ad supported. Okay. Well, Hulu is 2 different. Hulu has a SVOD component, which is Hulu Plus, which is subscription, and then Hulu, the non-Hulu Plus, which is open to everyone, is ad supported. So yes, Hulu is both. Yeah. You guys have Hulu here yet? No, I don't think yet. Yeah. I think it'll get more and more. I mean, I think it's basically the Amazon Prime is getting content, and Amazon Prime doesn't pay a lot yet because not a lot of people are using it. I think it's like a really good model compared to Netflix, because for $80 a year instead of $7 a month, it's about the same price when you pay yearly. And frankly, you get free shipping on all your products, plus you get to watch all this digital content. But there's not a lot of stuff on there yet. Frankly, I don't know why Amazon isn't as successful as iTunes and Netflix, because Amazon, for me, when I'm at home and I'm watching Amazon and Netflix, there's more stuff on Amazon than there is on Netflix, except for there's not as much on Prime as there is on Netflix. But Amazon, to me, is easier to use on my television, to be perfectly honest, than iTunes. iTunes can be a pain in the butt, actually, to access. Amazon, once you click on search and you start your search, whereas iTunes takes a while through their menu, through the Apple TV to get down to the search function. So, and that's just, Apple has an impressive marketing campaign and an impressive way to absorb customers into their way of doing things, and they're just brilliant marketers, which is why they're more successful than Amazon, at least in this realm. Amazon actually is, kills iTunes in Apple and books, but in terms of film media, iTunes obviously, and any kind of digital content, any music and film, Apple still rules, unfortunately or unfortunately. Okay, so how to sell VOD? They're basically sold through aggregators, okay, so people who aggregate content, and so you can do it through a private aggregator or an aggregator, which you can access directly, such as Distributor, where you actually pay to have your content aggregated online, and that's fine. I find that going through an aggregator, if you can find an aggregator who will do it, it will take 15 to 25% of your money, is good because as aggregators have relationships with the platforms, usually try to promote the product to the platform, and you should find out when you're talking to the aggregator what kind of marketing does the aggregator do and what kind of promotion does the aggregator do. So here's a brief list of some aggregators in the United States, and some of these aggregators actually work worldwide. Gravitas, who Bill Hicks went through, CRM, who I've used, Snag, who's here. There's Andrew Murphy from Snag who's wandering around here. New Video, and there's also a new company called Go Video in the United States. Go Digital, actually. Okay, so as I said before, the consumer experience of digital is how I want it, where I want it, in the way that I want it, on the platform that I want it. It's about abundance. So if this consumption is delivered by convenience, is governed by convenience, you want to make this product as convenient as possible, so that when you release digital, you want to try, I believe, to get up as many platforms as possible, close to the same amount of time, okay? So that if you can turn on iTunes worldwide, at the same time, I feel it's best to turn on iTunes worldwide if that works for you. The problem is now, is that countries are different, there's language differences, not everyone has robust broadband or VOD relationships, there's not these companies in many countries. It's still developing. I feel like this will be easier in 5 to 10 years for independent filmmakers. It's relatively easy to hit the English language markets now. To hit foreign language markets, it's a little tougher. Okay, but this is changing basically every month. There's more. Netflix is now going into Scandinavia and Latin America. I think they're trying to make an inroad into England, etc. So it's starting to become, as these networks, in a sense, it's an advantage to filmmakers. It's a boon and a bane to filmmakers that these companies are going worldwide. A, it gives them more clout, and so their impact is greater on independent filmmakers. But so long as they retain and still put independent content onto their networks, what that provides you is a larger reach, okay? So if you don't put it up online simultaneously, other people will do it for you, which is essentially what happens with piracy. So how do you monetize in a world of abundance? Okay, so number one is to embrace and encourage your audience to share and to use that as a way to build your audience. So as your audience shares content, then your audience, and if you can connect with that audience, then you can utilize that connection, all right, in some way to help build your brand. Number two is to think about creating repeat viewership. And this is, I don't have time to go into this a ton, but to generally stop thinking about films only being 90 minutes or shorter, feature length or shorter. Start looking at ways in which you can do regular content and build a regular audience out of regular content, over time, so that you're not, again, thinking project to project, but providing some continuation of content through one project to the next project. And this is where it gets to the point of doing web series, looking at YouTube as a way to build audience. And I think that's going to become easier and easier and more accessible and hopefully more lucrative over the next years. Okay, and then number C, as I mentioned earlier, is the need to create scarce goods. Okay, so in a world of digital abundance, you need to think about creating scarcity. So that brings me to the next two categories. So the first one is live events. Okay, so to me, it's important to redefine the theatrical experience. Okay, so currently studios, what is theatrical is only watching the film in a conventional theater when it starts on a Friday and ends on a Thursday. And that's defined legally as theatrical. So in any of your contracts concerning media or concerning your film, if theatrical is mentioned, that's what this refers to. is a theatrical experience that starts on a Thursday, ends on a Friday. It starts on a Friday, ends on a Thursday, and is in a conventional theater. All right. So what I think is that it should be watching films any place, any time, any media, so that what it essentially emphasizes is the communal nature of film and the event nature of film. So then you should be as diverse as comedy clubs, theaters, etc. Did you guys end up playing in any comedy clubs at all, or you just did conventional theaters?
We reached out to comedy club audiences. We did a couple of shows, but we found that the projection equipment, the sound equipment wasn't always up to scratch.
Right.
So bringing that in tended to make it impractical. So yes and no, we reached out to the audiences and didn't really take any.
Right. Okay.
We could have done that.
You could have done it, right? And you also had like a pretty good, robust theatrical experience. Had you not had that, you might have gone after comedy audiences more directly to comedy clubs. Like for us in Vomit, we actually did theatrical, but we actually screened in a lot of street art galleries as well. You know, where people just, I didn't really care as much about the projection, you know, the sound and the image. I cared, because we were doing theatrical, I just looked at every other event that could happen in any place was a way of accessing audience in a different way, okay? And I think it's good to be as imaginative as possible. And what this redefinition allows is for you to have more robust theatrical experience. And I think it's best just to use an example of the Joffrey film, where we launched our theatrical experience out of our premiere film festival. We actually simulcast that experience to 45 cities across the United States through Emerging Pictures in the United States. So actually, our world premiere was simulcast to 40 theaters across the United States, and combined our festival so that our festival run and our theatrical ran simultaneously. Not only that, we are running traditional theatrical events while at the same time doing non-theatrical events in theaters and other kinds of environments. We actually, our LA premiere and our LA event was actually at a ballet school and not in any of the Lemley or traditional theaters there. And we actually got 500 people to show up for that one night event, because what the scarcity that we created in that one night event was twofold. One is that it was only available on one night. To me, the problem with conventional theatrical is that, in a sense, it's a version of abundance, that there is no scarcity created, because the film starts on a Friday, ends on a Thursday, someone can see it 4 times a day all week long, so there's no pressure to have to see it at that one particular time, right? So, notion, Friday and Saturday night, I'm not going to go see an independent, depressing documentary on Friday or Saturday night. I'm going to go out and party. I'll do it on Sunday. I'm hungover for Friday and Saturday night. Again, I'm not going to go see a thoughtful documentary when I'm hungover. I'll do it on Monday night. Monday, Tuesday night, I need to study or I'm recovering from work. Wednesday night comes around, I'll add it to my Netflix queue. You know, and there's too much, that sense of abundance doesn't create a sense of urgency. Okay, so the 3 main avenues of the events, as I mentioned, are film festivals, conventional theatrical, and alternative and community theatrical. I think instead of doing a festival run for a year and then starting a release and doing theatrical, that immediately takes your release from a 1-year process, potential 1-year process, into a 2-year process. So to me, I feel that it's important, or it's a good idea for most films to condense that theatrical. Understand that film festivals are theatrical in nature, because you are screening in front of an audience, you know, in a live communal setting, and integrate them into one release window. Okay, so creating an event, and another way to create scarcity, besides limiting time, is to create an event that creates something unique that is unavailable anywhere else. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few examples. So one of which is having the filmmakers or someone who's involved in the film present at the event. So a prime example is Bill Hicks. I mean, not Bill Hicks, sorry, because he's dead. He couldn't show up. It's Kevin Smith, sorry. I'm still suffering from a little bit of jet lag. So Kevin Smith is quite a performer, has a fan base, and his theatrical for Red State ended up being this event tour that he did where he appeared with the film across the United States. They charged $80 a ticket, $60 to $80 a ticket, and what? Yeah, and even sometimes more, $68 a ticket to go. And these are one-night events in venues holding several thousand people that sold out. In that event release, they made $1.6 million, which is pretty impressive for a theatrical release. They were planning to do a 4,000 city conventional theatrical 8 months later, and I always wondered why. You know, what is the point of doing that when you're creating all this publicity and buzz for your film out of this event theatrical? And they eventually ended up canceling that because they realized they would have had to spend $5 to $20 million doing the conventional theatrical, and they probably weren't going to make enough money to support that conventional theatrical, and they had already had their theatrical by having their event theatrical. Okay, live music. So Anvil, Story of Anvil, which as documentary filmmakers you're probably familiar with, where the band in many of the cities would start playing during the end credits. They would be behind this screen during the end credits, and then would walk out on stage and do a live concert. Okay. Note by Note is a smaller example of that, which is the making of the Steinway piano, where the filmmaker started working with Steinway early on, not in terms of content, and he was very clear about that I'm making a film that concerns the Steinway piano, but it's not a promotional film for Steinway. But Steinway saw that this was going to help Steinway because of just the nature of the film, and so they offered to take the actual piano that the film is based on, and they flew that piano to many, many cities and still continue 3 years after the release where the film screens to schlep that piano to cities and hire a local pianist to play a concert before and after that film plays. Okay? Live music remix. I don't know, some of you might have seen on the documentary festival circuit DJ Spooky, who made a film called Antarctica. He does live musical remixes for it. There's an example, I don't think I have it coming up in this presentation, but a live video remix. Peter Greenaway for Tulsa Leopard Suitcases would re-edit the film live. He would have all the scenes on a video VJ board so that every audience saw a different version of the film. Live audience participation, so Rocky Horror Picture Show is an example, but also Best Worst Movie, which is a documentary about the making of Troll 2. A lot of the audience would come dressed as trolls, participate in the process. Okay, other kinds of things are social media engagement, where you can do calls to action at the end of the film. Tiffany Schlain, again, to use her as an example, did this in the film Connected, where she'd get her audience to become part of the connected community and to agree to shut off their be concerned about this and to shut off their cell phones at certain times, et cetera, or shut down their media at certain times, et cetera. So number 2 is limiting time and unique qualities, is appearance by a topical celebrity and also limiting time. So for instance, the Joffrey film, not only did we screen the film one night at Dance on Camera, but we had a panel discussion with former Joffrey dancers and the current head of the Joffrey Ballet afterwards, which was also netcast to these theaters around the United States, where actually then the audience could tweet in questions from around the United States and have the panel live and in real time answer those questions that the audience is tweeting in. Okay, so and as I said before, one-night bookings and embrace the short run. They can be your best friend. My experience has been time and time again that the one-night bookings are much more successful than a week-long run. The only difference is press. You will get more press from a week-long run than you will, especially in, for instance, New York, and possibly London's the same case, than you will with a one-night booking. But I have to say on the Joffrey film, while that happened, like in San Francisco, we didn't get a couple reviews from major papers because we weren't a week-long run. We got press from many major publications around the United States, including the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, even covering our one-night events. So the press is starting to come around where they will cover these events. And again, it's not just screening your film on one night. You have to provide something extra of value to make it newsworthy for those people to cover it. Okay. All right, so national one-night bookings I've already spoken about in terms of the Joffrey Ballet. This is another example where a film about debt relief screened 400 cinemas across the United States through a system called Fathom, which is actually rather expensive. It's about $125,000 to book satellite time, but where the panel discussion is SATcast instead of netcast. And this actually, they had a panel discussion with Warren Buffett afterwards, which was then piped to theaters across the United States. And then you guys in the United States, in the UK probably remember The Age of Stupid that did a new 2-night event, one in the United States, the 400 cinemas again through Fathom. They did an event afterwards that they then filmed and edited and then broadcast that to 60 countries around the world on the following day. Okay, so the consumer experience here is a communal, unique experience. That's what the consumer experience of a live event is. Okay, so what you need to do is accentuate this unique live communal experience if you want audiences to come. It's unavailable anywhere else. That's the sense of scarcity that you're providing. So what you need to do is to think of ways to make these events unique. And this is what the studios are struggling with, and I don't think they really get, is that as people can watch films in their homes in the same way, in very similar ways as they used to only be able to experience in movie theaters through home video systems, the studios are trying through 3D and 4D and IMAX, etc., to create a unique experience, but they're not really getting the sense of, number one, scarcity, and number two, events, and how independent filmmakers are actually can be more advanced in the studios in connecting with audience because of their facility in doing this in a more nimble fashion. Okay, number two is merchandise. As far as classification, actually this is number three. So number one was digital, number two was live events, and this slide is wrong, unfortunately, which is merchandise. Okay, so why is merchandise relevant? Okay, essentially merchandise is relevant because people like to buy shit. Okay, fess up, you like to buy shit, and you have to buy stuff. You don't walk around naked. You buy clothes. Everyone's wearing clothes. You all made a choice. You looked at your wardrobe and you went, I'm going to wear this, and I'm going to wear this. I look better in black, so I chose black jeans and a black shirt. This is my best presentation outfit, so that's what I chose today to put on. All right, so you also still like to give gifts. You like to put stuff on your walls. You like to have objects on your shelves. There's certain things, humans like to surround themselves with objects that express their identity, and they like to give things to people that express their identity, or also humans like to buy things that remind them of things. So people still buy physical books because they like to read the book and see it on their shelves and go, yes, that book reminds me of, like Rimbaud. There's these poems in Rimbaud that I really love, and having it on my shelf still reminds me. My son, who's 16 years old, bless his heart, he still prefers to read books in physical form than on a Kindle or on an iPad. Okay, and I know he's rare. Okay, so I think you need to start thinking about ways that you create objects that people want to buy instead of what a conventional DVD does is deliver zeros and ones in a crap plastic box. Okay, that's essentially my view of a DVD, which is zeros and ones in a crap plastic box. Okay, so one way is innovative packaging. And musicians have done this better than filmmakers so far. So this is the Data Rock music release. It's essentially a USB drive which is embedded inside of this toy. Okay? So let me see if this has yes. Inside the USB pen has all this digital content. Generally, all this digital content is available on the internet for free or nearly for free. Essentially, all this content that's in the USB is available in a world of abundance digitally. Okay, but what is scarce is this toy. Okay, so if you want this, if you're a Data Rock fan and you want this cool toy on your shelf, and you want to be able to tell your friends that, look at this album I just bought, which has all this, which is an album, you know, that's kind of cool, all right? So one of the things I'm hoping to create for Bomb and 2 is actually like a little toy bomb or a little toy that represents our logo and that actually has a USB drive in it and be one of the, you know, because there aren't really any filmmakers doing this, I want to have an example of film that actually does this. Flaming Lips release has done 2 releases this way, where they actually embed the USB drive within a gummy skull or on another one within a gummy fetus. I can guarantee you that none of the people who buy these gummy skulls are actually eating the gummy skull in order to get to the USB drive that's embedded inside in order to access the digital content. No, the people are actually buying the gummy skull to put it on their shelves and show their friends, and then they're getting the content through Spotify, iTunes, or some other method. Okay, so this is an example of some film packaging. This is Helvetica, the Blu-ray edition, which I'm not. What does this remind you of? It reminds you of collectible vinyl packaging. It's an album, basically. It's a Blu-ray edition in an album form. Okay, and another example of this, a further example of this. This is the Frownland DVD release, and I really love this. This is a company called Factory 25 in the United States, and they're they're the same people who created the packaging and used to work with Gary Huswick, who created the Helvetica Blu-ray edition, which I just showed you, but they've gone even further, where here's the DVD that goes inside of this slip cover, which goes inside of this side of the album packaging, and then over here, this vinyl is the soundtrack to the film, okay, which goes in the other side. Plus, there's a little booklet, a little comic booklet that is drawn by the artist, and then also a poster inside. So this, I show the other versions of Factory 25 that I have to my friends all the time. Look at the school packaging, and this they sell for $39.95 instead of $19.95 for a straight DVD, or $14.95 or $12.95 for just a DVD. This you can actually price at a higher markup. Okay, so number two, besides innovative packaging, is to create actual physical scarcity for your physical objects. So this involves creating limited editions. So this is the same guy who did Helvetica, did a film called Objectified, and I don't know if you can see this, but what do you notice about these two products here? Number one, they're limited editions. Number two, the price point is $75, for a flash drive and a DVD. Number three, they're sealed, okay, so that makes them collectible. And number four, one of them is out of stock already, and now the second one is already out of stock. At $75, they're out of stock. Because you've created a limited edition, you've created a sense of scarcity, then people have a motivation to buy it because they know that they're going to be one of few who actually has one of these things. Okay, so for us, for Joffrey, we created autographed DVDs where the dancers in the film actually autographed. We created a limited edition of 100, and we sell these for $34.95, but actually we sell these more in packages with other products, which I'm going to talk about next, which is creating a diverse range of interesting products. Okay, so actually I'm going to talk about packages for it. So create a diverse range of interesting products. So OKGo is great at this, and if you want to see a diverse range of products constantly, go to the OKGo store, and you'll see a variety of different things. So they have autographed ping pong ball set, okay, and official OKGo flipbook. They also have limited edition now. If you go to their website now, they have limited edition signed paper airplanes. Okay? Because musicians know that their music is available for free. They have to figure out another way to monetize for their fans. All right, this is a filmmaker who made a film called See the Scenes of the Blues that she gave away for free on the internet. But she also made an artist edition of the DVD. But she also made t-shirts and jewelry, which is based on the imagery in the film. And she actually made more money from the t-shirts and the jewelry of the film than she did from the DVD, but she did eventually also, even though she gave the film away for free, she even sold DVDs of the film because the people who saw the film wanted to own the film as a collectible and to remind them of the film that they really loved that they saw for free on the internet. Okay, this is a film in the UK called Sound It Out. Anyone heard about Sound It Out? All right. So the PMD is Sally Hoxton on that, and what they made is they made this jewelry, which is in the logo of the film, which is about one of the last vinyl record stores in the UK, and so their products are in 7-inch vinyl. Okay, so Kevin Smith sells tons of merchandise. He's a great example. If you go to the Kevin Smith site and see what kinds of merchandise that he's selling, is very instructive to find different kinds of things that you can possibly sell to your audiences. Obviously, his audience likes he has a fanboy audience, and they like to buy these little figurines. So for that audience, this makes sense. For most other audiences, this may not make sense. But for his audience, because he knows his audience wants to buy this, remember, audience, what's the 4 steps? The 4th step is what kind of products does your audience want to buy? He knows his audience wants to buy these, so he creates these for his audience. Okay, so then you also want to create packages and price tiers for your products. So the best example of this, or one of a great example of this, is 9 Inch Nails goes 1 through 4. And if you want to see this on your own time, you just Google 9 Inch Nails, NIN, goes 1 through 4, and you can see this close up. So basically, I'll tell you what he did. So 9 tracks for free, all the tracks digitally for $5, all the tracks digitally in every format on 2 CDs for $10, and then for $75, you've got all that, plus 2 DVDs of the visuals that inspired the film, plus a book of photographs that inspired the film. So in a cloth-bound case. So you get the case, and you get the book of CDs and shelf, it looks nice. Then for $300, you get all that, plus 2 gallery quality prints of 2 of the photographs, or 2 prints of 1 photograph each, 2 total photographs. And that was a limited edition of 2,500 that sold for $300. That sold out within 3 hours. Okay, the limited edition. And again, this is Trent and 9 Inch Nails. But of all of this merchandise, within 24 hours, I believe the figure is they sold $1.6 million worth of merchandise in 24 hours. Now that's 9 Inch Nails, but that's 9 Inch Nails doing it on their own outside of the studio, outside of a record label. Okay, that's direct to fan. Okay, so that's, now you're not 9 Inch Nails, but it shows the power of creating price tiers, scarce merchandise, providing products that your audience wants, and connecting with your audience, which Trent has done over the years very intensely, and then selling directly to your audience. Okay. Okay, so educational can be lucrative. It's a ton of work, but one of the things that you want to think about is your educational window. And one thing that you might think about, because a lot of educational distributors won't take you if you're already releasing a home video DVD, is to think about, plan in advance, maybe think about starting your educational during your festival run, or during your theatrical run before your DVD comes out. So as to give your educational distributors a 6-month window. Okay, but you have to then think about this before you start your festival run, because most educational distributors need a 6 to 9 month window, lead time before they actually release your product. Okay, so the consumer experience here is object and identity. I want that object because it speaks to me, has some intrinsic value, says something about me. All right, so if that's the experience, then you need to think about creating products that does speak to your audience and speaks to something special and specific about your audience that they'll want to buy and share with their friends. Okay, so immersive and interactive, what time is it? Oh, it's 12:04. I can go over this really quickly, which is an introduction to transmedia. How many people in the room are familiar with transmedia and cross-media, like went to the cross-media showcase? Okay, so I'm going to go over this how many people are not familiar with transmedia and cross-media? Okay, I'll go over this very briefly. So essentially, transmedia, also referred to as cross-media or multi-platform or enhanced storytelling, is when a narrative takes place over multiple media platforms. Now, a narrative is not just a narrative or fiction film. A narrative is also a narrative is a story narrative that is also within a documentary film. And basically, it's a story world that you are telling. Okay. So the other principle, there's 2 principal things within transmedia, to my mind. Number 1 is that audiences are fractured. Audiences engage media in different ways. And so in order to access audiences, you should be creating content that fits on multiple platforms so that you can engage your audience in the platform that is comfortable to them. And because audiences generally, it's hard to make audiences come to you, it's better if you think of coming to audiences. So if an audience engages short-form content through YouTube, but might still consider buying a film, it might make sense to engage them via short-form content on YouTube, and then drive them to a longer-form film, for instance. Okay? The second concept related to cross-media is the story universe, which is where this narrative is larger than any narrative that can be told in one film. So for instance, Bombit is a very easy example. We shot all these artists all over the world, and we weren't able to contain all the storylines within 90 minutes. I'm sure as documentary filmmakers, you're very experienced with this, where you have all these different storylines that you want to tell but can't fit into the film. All right? So those are different aspects of the story that you can then put into different avenues. So I'm working on a project currently now that they're struggling with, even at inception, what to film and how that is going to fit into a 90-minute narrative. And what we're devising from that, we already were talking about cross-media and having multiple different platforms and ways of engaging audience, using the web, having a art tour that would go throughout the world to medical schools, because it's a medical-related documentary. But then we started realizing, how can we take this other content that the filmmaker's been invited to film that won't necessarily fit? And there's multiple different ways that content can live and engage with audiences outside of feature film. You just have to be creative about how that's going to happen. okay? Again, so I think that this concept is liberating because it gets you out of the way of thinking, oh, I have to make this as a feature film, this has to be a short. It can result in different forms of content being distributed differently, that not everything has to be done in the same way. So I was just talking to the guys from District Eye last night, and what's interesting that of their most successful titles, half of their most successful titles are shorts, okay? And these are shorts that have made tens of, according to them, in the thousands and even into the tens of thousands of dollars. And that is, to me, because audiences don't care so much about length anymore. Audiences care about an experience. And if they can have a valuable experience for $2, $3, $4 through a piece of media, then it doesn't really matter whether it's 90 minutes or 20 minutes or 10 minutes. Okay? What they're looking for is an engaging experience that they want to share with their friends. All right? So, for instance, my son, who's 16, views generally, and I hope he forgives me for saying this, views anything that's 90 minutes long as a burden to watch because it's like that's 90 minutes of his time. Okay? That's a lot of other things that he could be doing, listening to, watching. So I know my son would rather, given a choice of a 90-minute film versus watching something for him that's probably really funny, that's 5 minutes, my son will pay $2 for something that's 5 minutes long versus probably watching something for free that's 90 minutes long. You see what I'm saying? So I don't think necessarily, what I'm trying to emphasize is for filmmakers to get out of the old ways, the old models of only making shorts, 90-minute films, hour-long television shows, or half-hour television shows. Okay. I'm going to skip through these examples. Well, I'll show you the Vomit app because I really love it. So this is an iPhone app which had some content, but the whole idea of it was not necessarily content. And again, cross-media isn't necessarily about creating media content that is viewer and watcher. It's often about creating an engaging experience or interactive experience for your audience. So what is my audience like? My audience likes seeing photos and discovering images of graffiti, right? That's what people who like street art like to do. All right, so what the Vomit app is something where people can take photos of graffiti and it's uploaded to a database which then relates that to Google Maps so that then you can go to a city and click on Near Me and it will show you, if enough people participate in this, it will show you where what graffiti is near you that someone else has identified and liked. Okay? So that you can upload content and then you can also view content that other people have seen. So you can pick an image for an album or take it straight from your camera and upload it. Then you can browse by what people have rated it at, what's near me, or by artist. And then we also put 40 minutes of Vomit content on there, which was actually a mistake. The reason it was a mistake is because it takes a long time for the app to download. That when we do a new iteration of this app, I'll probably keep this content off so that the app will download much quicker. By having so much content on it, it takes a long time and people get frustrated with how long the app takes to download. And then we allow people to share it, and then of course we have a link to our store on it, and a link to our other social media sites as well. So, do I have time for this? Yeah. So I needed to show you another documentary that is not a feature documentary, which is actually short. It's called Not in Our Town, which is a short that was on PBS in the United States. So here's the PBS website. But this is the Not in Our Town homepage. And what it shows you is how they're actually engaging audiences through this short film, which is about hate crimes in the United States. So they definitely have ways for people to get involved, watch, learn, and actually teach. They have an educational program around the documentary, which is not just an educational DVD that they sell. It's actually an educational program that schools adopt within their schools to teach and also interact with students about hate crimes. So this is one of their the different kinds of lesson plans and teaching opportunities that they provide. They also have this map which shows not only where hate crimes, which are the red dots, occur in the United States, and there's actually much more dots, but this is just all that would come up in this particular screenshot. But the green are where different versions of the Not in Our Town program are instituted throughout the United States. So this is a version of this was actually developed in the BAVAC Cross Media Producers Lab that then was started with a film project, but then became much more than the film itself. It became an educational project throughout the United States. So, and this is the example of the different kinds of lesson plans that are available for teachers, which is part of their website. This is another project, which is called The Waiting Room, which is a different film, where actually it shows different stories. It's about a hospital in the United States, and the transmedia experience, the cross-media platform, allows you to get inside the storytelling project and get all the different experiences of these people that are not in the feature film. Okay, I'm just going to go through this because I think it's probably time for me to stop talking and to answer questions. The key to this is participatory culture, and to understand that not everyone is going to participate, that people will participate at their own level, their own comfort level. So some people want to participate a lot, and some people won't want to participate at all. And what you want to think about in creating your campaigns is allowing your audience to engage at different levels. So some people will really want to engage and do a lot. Other people won't want to do anything. So you want to make it accessible for those people who don't want to spend a lot of time engaging with your content so that they can access your content in an easier fashion. Okay. So that's essentially it. So any questions? Yeah.
The first test is intriguing, but I'm picturing my tiny PR department filled with boxes and being like the post office every 10 minutes. Can you talk about the mechanics of that?
Yes, but I'm going to do something that in my jet lag I forgot to do earlier, which is pass around my email list, or email list sign up. Although you can also just follow me on Twitter if you want. And hang on a second. So yes, you can do, that is called fulfillment. Hang on a second. That is called fulfillment, merchandise fulfillment, and you can do it out of your home. If you don't feel like you don't have a ton of orders, you don't have to have a ton of merchandise in your home, and it doesn't take that long for you to do it. But there's plenty of companies that will do this for you, where I've never actually done it myself. I have no patience to take an order, put it in a package. I mean, it's enough to do the screenings, to send out the material, the advanced screeners for screenings, and then to fulfill the stuff for screenings, which I do. That is something that I and my assistant do. But for merchandise fulfillment, no. There's integrated platforms such as Topspin, which I recommend, and I recommend it because, and I used to think because Topspin will take 15% of your money in order to do the fulfillment and also the shopping cart, et cetera, everything else. But I actually, and to me, that felt kind of high. So for Joffrey, we actually went out and did our own integrated solution where we actually did a shopping cart, got a separated shopping cart, got a separate merchant account, which is to collect the money, found the fulfillment company, and then are also doing our own customer service. In order to set that up, it was an enormous amount of work. So actually for filmmakers who just want like a turnkey solution, I recommend using one of the platforms that has a turnkey solution. The reason I recommend Topspin is because they have something which I didn't have time to talk about, which is where you can do what is called email for media, or tweet for media, or like for media, where you actually give an audience a piece of content in exchange for an email address. So it's a way in advance of doing a release to distribute content and gather audience data and audience information that you can eventually sell to. And they're the only ones who actually have that is shareable. There's another way that you can do that. You can do that through MailChimp as well, but there's no facility for people to share the content through MailChimp. Topspin is the only one that I know of that actually has an email for media section that is also shareable. So, yeah.
sold, he told me that he made half of his production budget, which he then put into his next film. So I know it's a DIY way of doing it, but
Right.
in comparison to 9 Inch Nails, it's not as much money.
Yeah.
He still made half his money back.
Yeah, exactly. That you're not, I use 9 Inch Nails as a far outlier, and the reason I use that example is because it's a great example of scarcity as well as creating product tiers. Because I think the thing about product tiers is important is because different people want to engage you at different price points, which is why if you look at crowdfund campaigns, you're recommended to provide a $1, reward, $25 reward, $50 reward, $100,000, $250,000 reward, because different people, if you only did a $25 reward, it'd be very difficult to raise large sums of money. It's the same way with selling merchandise. That we sell a lot of on the Joffrey site, a lot of our $75 packages. And if I didn't provide that package for people to buy, they would just be buying $20 PDs. Yeah. Anything else? Yep.
I was just wondering, your scarcity versus and the live events versus the getting it out as mass as possible. In which order? Because I'm still in the old-fashioned release plan.
Right.
So where your scarce live events happen in relation to basically it being available on the internet.
Well, to me, it depends for each film. It's different. Some films will use like a stud digital event to create buzz. Like there's a film called Home that was free on YouTube on Earth Day, which had 1 million views. But the goal of that film was not monetization; it was to spread a message. Generally, I still think that live events are good prior to wide release. Prior before digital release or simultaneous, because live events are great publicity generators. So the thing is that it's very easy to get your film up onto digital platforms. It's very easy to distribute your film digitally. But what's difficult is to generate traffic for people to come and engage with that piece of content. And so what live events are great at creating attention and getting attention around your film, which is still unique and great. To me, it's an essential tool in the film's release. And so it's generally better to have that prior to the release of the rest of the products. But you want to do it somewhat close, like I feel like a 2 or 3 month window, like event window, prior to merchandise and or digital is important. I do think that you probably want to think about selling some kind of merchandise during the event release, whether it's the DVD or other kinds of products like I was pointing out, because when people hear about the film, you want to give them a way to engage with the merchandise. Okay, so what you might think about doing is doing some of the merchandise during your event release, because also you want to sell that merchandise live. One of the best and most profitable ways of selling merchandise is at live events, which musicians do all the time. A lot of musicians make more money off of their merch table at concerts than they actually make from ticket sales, okay, as an example. So you want to be able to take advantage of that and then think about using that as a publicity window and also a monetary generation window prior to the digital release. And you can also, if you don't sell DVDs during your event theatrical window, you can do pre-orders. And that's one of the things that's also good about TopSpin, is that you can do, a lot of places it's difficult to do pre-orders because credit card companies will only allow you to hold the money for 30 days. TopSpin will allow you to have multiple months of pre-orders so that the orders, because they know that musicians want to tour for months before releasing the digital product, but during that tour is when people want to engage and buy online what they're hearing live, so they allow people to pre-order the product online, which then they get at a certain specific date later during the release. Yeah. I guess you in the very back.
Thanks. My question is about digital rights and distribution.
Yeah.
The case which might be interesting for this is also that talking to different distributors right now, mainly about broadcast, and the question always arises, how do we do it in the contract for the digital rights? No? They ask me which platforms I want to keep, which for me is a quite complicated one because I don't know exactly what is going to happen in the future. And
that's really nice that they're asking you what you want to keep. That's very rare. Usually they say, we want all of this, and you know.
I'm really happy about this, to be honest.
So what is the?
What would you recommend?
I would recommend keeping everything but what they're able to distribute. So whatever they're in the business of doing, give them that and keep everything else. So, I mean, can you be more specific, like what the, you know, this will probably be instructive, like what rights do they distribute? Like, is it in one country or is it worldwide?
No, it's worldwide. It's a worldwide distributor.
Okay. And is it an all rights distributor? Like, do they do theatrical, DVD, and digital, or?
We're restricting it right now. I am continuing to do DVD, for example.
Right. So, but what are they in the main business of doing? Are they in the main business of selling
Broadcast.
Broadcast. Then just give them broadcast and keep all the digital. You know.
This is complicated nowadays because TV, as you know, on PBS and others.
I know, but you just said, you know, they asked what rights do you want to keep. I would say keep AVOD, TVOD, and SVOD. Ask for that. You know, which is ad-supported. And if you have to give up anything, give up AVOD because it's difficult to monetize ad-supported revenue. It's one of the more difficult ones to ad-support. And it's the one that broadcasters want the most. Okay? So the first step I would do in giving the rights back to them would be to give them non-exclusive AVOD so that you can still do AVOD yourself. And I would definitely keep transactional, and I would definitely try to keep SVOD. And the easiest to keep is going to be transactional because that's the furthest from broadcast. Because broadcast isn't generally in the vein of doing transactional VOD. Although cable VOD is transactional VOD, it's just a cable version of transactional VOD. And SVOD, there is some similarities to cable and television, so that's one they might fight for. And then AVOD is the one that they're going to want the most. So if you ask what to ask for, I'm telling you that's what to ask for. But then it's a negotiation from then on. And as I said, it's basically an intense negotiation. And I know this from firsthand experience. So it's like those are the rights you want to keep. The other rights you want to keep, I would recommend, is to keep the ability to sell merchandise, including DVDs, off of your website, and to sell digital off of your website. To do transactional off of your own, and usually the way it's put is like it's a website wholly owned by the filmmaker, the filmmaker's wholly owned website. So that what that allows you to do is, so say you have foreign sales in 10 territories, right? But you don't have sales, and those territories even want your transactional VOD, say for instance. But then what it allows you to do is to put Distrify on your website so that people in every country other than those 10 territories can access your film and pay for it throughout the rest of the world. Okay, so that's one of the beauties of Distrify. And even if you hold back transactional, and what it allows you to do is have someone aggregate your film to iTunes so that you can have iTunes, put your film up on iTunes in the 30 territories, as long as you have translations for all those territories. Put up the film in all the territories that iTunes does, and then also have Distrify throughout the world. And whenever there's a territory that also wants the transactional rights, you can turn off iTunes and you can turn off Distrify in those specific territories on a case-by-case basis. And so what it requires is kind of like a more facile and more interactive relationship with your sales agent, essentially. And it kind of has to move from a situation where, to me, sales agents say, trust us, we're going to do everything right, and, we'll let you know when things happen, to a thing of, we want to hold these rights, we want to have interest in these rights, and, we need to approve deals, so we need to work with you on a more interactive basis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. What is possible for you as you're also a filmmaker and a small production company on your own, what is possible on the online to do yourself? like
Well, it's very-
iTunes, Amazon?
Well, iTunes and Amazon are accessible yourself. Amazon's accessible without an aggregator. iTunes, you need to go through an aggregator, but there's, you throw a rock and you can hit an aggregator these days. And as I say, Stag Films is here. Like, go meet with Andrew Murr. They're now, in addition to doing what they do with Snag, they're also aggregating content. But there's lots of aggregators in the United States, and who do lots of content. So there's a new one called The Orchard, which is also really interesting. And it's an independent aggregator. So
What is it called? Sorry.
The Orchard. They're based out of New York. And then you can do Distrify, which allows you, and it's not exclusive. You can do aggregated content to platforms, and then you can do Distrify off of your website. And the Distrify guys are here, of course. Peter and Andy are floating around. They're having their ice cream social tonight, so you should go down and say hi and meet with them. What's our time? Oh, we done? It's 12:30. Okay. Thank you, guys.